to us this year. So let's welcome Peter and Piers.
Send around some background material, if I may. And yeah, if we just and this, and this, and then with your permission, let me just kind of. I'm hoping I don't have to use the microphone full time, or is that required to be recorded?
No.
Okay. You can hold it. I may do that. I'm going to propose that we do a non-linear presentation today. What I'd like to do, Arizona is one of very few states in the United States that has a clean elections law. And clean elections is not about clean elections, it's about clean money. But what I would like to do is, Bill Moyers has done a 7 minute and 3 seconds mini documentary on clean elections in Arizona. I'd like you to see that so that you've kind of got an overview, and I'm sure many of you are very tuned into this already, but that you kind of see what the law is and what the results have been. But then I'm going to digress a little bit, because I'd like to, with this group, not just talk about the civic side of clean elections, but I want to talk about the justice side of it. And so, you know, if I were speaking to a Kiwanis club, I think I'd just talk about the technicalities of the law and the fact that voter turnout is up and there are more candidates are running and there's, you know, more competition, those kinds of things. But with your permission, I would like to talk about some of both the strategic and the justice implications of campaign finance. And then circle back around and talk about Arizona's law and the challenges that are there. So, is that okay with folks? Because it will be, as I say, it's going to be non-linear. You're going to see stuff about the law, and then I'm not going to talk about the law for a little bit. And then I'll come back to it. If everybody's okay with that, that's how we'll go. Okay? Why don't we go to Bill Moyers?
Election 2002. Big money once again dominated the political process. Candidates, parties, and special interest groups spent $1 billion on television advertising. Soft money spending by the parties skyrocketed 72% over the previous midterm elections. And insiders from both major parties set up new fundraising organizations crafted to do an end run around the modest campaign finance reforms included in the Mccain Feingold law. Proof that the problem of money in politics continues to pollute the democratic process. But it doesn't have to be this way. In 2 states, Arizona and Maine, real campaign finance reform has succeeded in cutting the cord between special interest money and candidates. Voters approved far-reaching reform initiatives in Maine in 1996 and Arizona in 1998. The new systems had their maiden run in 2000. Now, with the 2002 election, this revolutionary reform, clean elections, has dramatically changed the political landscape and legislature of Arizona and Maine. The results in Arizona and Maine stunned the experts. More people ran for office. More women and people of color ran. Voters had more choices. Candidates spent less time begging for money and more time talking to voters. In Arizona, voters for the first time ever elected a clean elections candidate governor. 77% of the Maine Senate is now made up of candidates who ran clean, as is more than half the Maine House. And in both states, voters elected strong clean elections legislators who owed their elections not to big money or special interests, but to the people, proving that we can change the way governing gets done and take back our voice and our democracy. In 2002, the $5 bill, the amount candidates had to raise from hundreds of voters in order to qualify for clean money funding, became the currency of the political realm in Arizona. 28 out of 32 candidates for statewide office, including 7 out of the 8 major party candidates for governor, opted to participate in clean elections. There was more competition for higher office in Arizona than in many years. And when the election was over, 9 out of 11 statewide offices, including governor, secretary of state, Attorney General, and Treasurer were held by candidates who took no private special interest money and therefore owed no favors to big donors. Democrat Janet Napolitano became the first governor elected anywhere running clean, accepting $2.3 million in public funding in return for collecting at least $4,005 contributions, agreeing to abide by strict spending limits and to raise no private funds.
I got to spend time with voters as opposed to spending time, dialing for dollars or trying to sell tickets at $250 a plate fundraisers. This was much better.
More and different candidates ran for office. Overall participation by women rose significantly, and the number of Latino and Native American candidates more than tripled.
The biggest benefits I think clean elections offers is more of a pool of good candidates.
It has changed the political landscape because you recognize, first of all, that more people are probably going to be involved in the process.
I do believe that clean elections, the publicly financed process, is democracy in action.
It's grassroots at its best.
So it freed me up from, the chase of the dollars. It allowed me to concentrate on walking the district, meeting folks.
The difference between being able to go out and spend your time talking with voters, meeting with groups, doing things like traveling to communities that have been underrepresented in the past, as opposed to being on the phone selling tickets to $250 a plate fundraisers. That's the real practical difference.
I don't owe anyone after the race I don't owe them any favors, and I think that's the instrumental.
The fact that for Attorney General, for many positions, to have to go to the very same interests that you're going to be regulating or potentially suing for your money to run for office is a disaster. It's a fundamental mistake in the system as it exists. And to be able to be free of that, to be able to have public funding which makes you independent from any specific interest is I think, a liberating factor. It's one that will allow me to do a much better job, I think, as Attorney General.
Overall, people are excited about it because they feel that their particular legislator will not be tied to special interest dollars. And that means a lot to them. The number of constituency calls since I've been involved with clean elections have increased dramatically. People really feel that they have a stronger, even stronger tie to you, just more so than just the vote.
You're able to concentrate on the issues what need to be tackled, as opposed to figuring out where the money you're right is going to be coming from at all times.
As a result of the 2002 election, clean elections incumbents make up 45% of the Arizona State House and 17% of the Senate.
It's changed the whole look of what the legislative body looks like. It's opened it to more minorities, it's opened it up to more women, and you need these different viewpoints.
There's a complete turnover at the State House, and there's all kinds of new people. And some of those people would not be viable candidates without clean elections.
After a tentative May run in 2000, in 2002, the clean election system in Arizona came into its own as a clear, popular, and powerful political asset. More than half of all candidates ran clean. The system enjoys the support of 2/3 of Arizonans, surveyed by the Arizona Republic newspaper and the state's most prominent politicians.
Clean elections works well to overcome the influence of special interests. It gives Arizonans the power to create good government.
Go ahead and turn it off. All right, nobody fell asleep when the lights went down? All right, good. When Susan introduced me, she talked about my background, and the name she struggled with asked me is the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees.
I don't know which one it is.
And in Arizona, at least when I came here, and during the years that I was the director here, we were the second largest giver to legislative candidates. So I can talk about campaign finance, I think, from both sides of the aisle. Both from the standpoint of someone who's been very involved in big money finance, and having seen it involved in campaign finance reform. What I'd like to do, and this may be useful if you want to jot it down, a couple of resources I'd like you to have are as we think about the civil rights impact of campaign finance, there is an article in this month, the May issue of Black Enterprise magazine, and a website that is particularly on campaign finance and its connection to civil rights. And then an additional resource is a website called colorofmoney.com. .org. Colorofmoney.org. Now that's a collaboration of 3 groups. The Fannie Lou Hamer Project, and Ms. Hamer, for those of you who've been around as long as I would remember that she stood up to Lyndon Johnson. She was from Mississippi and led the Mississippi Freedom Delegation in 1964 and stood up to Lyndon Johnson and said that she was not going to, first of all, that the delegation was not going to settle for an all-white, boss-driven delegation for Mississippi, and secondly, that she was not going to take Lyndon Johnson's compromise of kind of a pat on the head and if you won't make a fuss this year, we'll in 1968 we'll make sure that things are fair. So the Fannie Lou Hamer Project, the Southwest Voter Registration Project, which is the legacy of a fellow by the name of Willie Velasquez, and then Public Campaign, which is a national campaign rights organization. So Color of Money, you can actually look at state by state or zip code by zip code where money comes from, particularly for federal campaigns, where money comes from, what percentage of folks in that zip code have incomes above 100,000, what percentage are in poverty, what percentage are white, what percentage Latino, what percentage Black, and how that affects the various political power, zip code by zip code, district by district, state by state. So let me take a step back, because I think in terms of campaign finance, the story of how it's evolved and how it has its perverse consequences is one of just that as the system has changed, the consequences have become perverse. Certainly when it came to voting rights, there was no unintended consequence about it at all. That in terms of civil rights, the right to vote was denied to people, first of all, to people of color, certainly to all Native Americans, certainly to all women, certainly for anyone who didn't own property. Remember our founding document, when our Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal, the Constitution put together a system that the people who voted were white, male, and owned property. And they didn't get 95% or 97% conventional VA or FHA loans. We're talking about people who had to have substantial bucks to own property. So really we're talking about moneyed white males were the only people for whom democracy existed in 1776. Now, the interesting story of our nation is that over the last 200 and almost 50 years, our nation has opened up to women, to people of color, to Native Americans, to people without property. But our nation is also a struggle between the concept of being a republic and a democracy, because we're both. It's a blend. And in the republic, campaign finance wasn't an issue. Remember, who voted for senators from 1776 on? The legislature, the state legislators, who were white, male, property. Who selected candidates for president? The convention delegates after what? Caucus? A caucus by whom?
White property.
A caucus by the bosses. I mean, it was literally smoke-filled rooms. that decided candidacies, and delegations swung based on that.
They eliminated smoke.
Not in those rooms. If you've read Gary Will's book about Abraham Lincoln, when he ran for president in 1860, it was still the case that it was at least unseemly and maybe unethical to campaign for president. Abraham Lincoln went home to Springfield, Illinois. Now the convention was in Chicago, so they had rigged it. You know, they knew what they were doing. They made sure that the convention was in his home state. But he went home to Springfield and waited. And no primaries, no traveling the country. He waited until the deals got cut and the convention was ready to vote. After the convention voted, he traveled to Chicago and not only accepted the nomination, but met his vice president, whom he'd never met before. The notion of a popular democracy is a fairly recent and still imperfect notion. But with the evolution of a popular democracy has come the need for campaign finance dollars. Because now, instead of a few bosses making the deals and the money going between hands and the deals going between hands in those rooms and back to the governors and back to the people who had to be brought along, now it takes media, it takes pollsters, it takes all of those things. And so, just at the moment when bossism starts to decline, and in 1965 we passed a a voting rights law that begins the long, torturous, hard process of bringing people into the system, votes start counting less. So just at the moment when votes begin to count more, it becomes more and more necessary for campaign finance dollars, and votes begin to count. They are important, but certainly not all of the equation. Does this make sense? Now, many of you, again, have been around as long as I, and you probably remember the stories of Willie Sutton, the bank robber during the 1920s and during the Depression. Okay? And he was asked one time, "Mr. Sutton, why do you rob banks?" And the answer was, "That's where they keep the money." So if you want to do campaign finance, where do you go? Not to banks, to where they keep the money. And you go to bank PACs and bank presidents and bank employees, but you also go to oil companies and insurance companies and HMOs and all of those folks, okay? Now,
Forget the media.
if money becomes so important, then those without money become less important. I want to give you some information about Arizona, taken from the Color of Money website. Where do you think campaign dollars come from in Arizona? Well, but what geography?
Real estate.
Geography. Phoenix? Where in Phoenix?
Scottsdale.
Scottsdale, you'd be wrong. Scottsdale is actually number 5. Interestingly, I thought. Mesa? Not a clue. Not close. They're in the top 20. Central Avenue, you're getting closer. Paradise Valley, somebody said that a moment ago, is number 1. The Biltmore area is number 2. Now, a fellow that I learned to organize under, the whole school of thought came from Saul Alinsky. Many of you may remember Saul Alinsky, the community organizer and activist. He taught that there are two kinds of power: organized money and organized people. Most people, when they hear that, they think about, oh yeah, money, people. The important thing is organized. So the difference between a Paradise Valley and a Scottsdale is not that there's more money in Paradise Valley. It's that people in Paradise Valley are willing to organize their money. They're willing to put it into politics. Because that's where lots and lots of lobbyists live. That's where lots and lots of folks, lots and lots of attorneys live. And so Paradise Valley comes in way ahead of Scottsdale because people are willing to organize their money. Paradise Valley, from 2000 to 2002, so this is not the presidential year, although the Bush campaign did start raising money prior to 2002. But in between 2000 and 2002, which is kind of a down year in some ways, in Paradise Valley, they gave over $3 million in contributions of $200 or more. Works out to 232 people a person. Can I hold questions for just a little bit? Biltmore's next, $1.5 million. The Foothills in Tucson, about the same amount. And then Scottsdale comes behind, a little bit behind that. Actually, Scottsdale came in slightly less than $1 million in the top zip code there. This zip code right here, if you took this zip code, it actually goes from here south. You call it South Central Tempe. So it's really a kind of a working class neighborhood. I mean, middle class, working class, not rich. It's not the La Victoria neighborhood that's close to the, that is close to the university. It is a middle class, working class neighborhood. This neighborhood, 85281, is number 64 of the 296 zip codes in Arizona. Here, $77,000. $77,000. Now this goes from right here around Apache Road down south of the 60 to Baseline. So again, you're talking about working, not poor, not low income. In fact, this zip code that there only about 11% of folks are in poverty in this zip code, and about 10% of folks in this zip code households earn over $100,000 a year. So it's almost balanced in that way. Okay. A zip code in Maryvale. People know where Maryvale is? So along Thomas Road between the freeway and say 51st Avenue in that area. In the Maryvale zip code, 22% of folks are in poverty, and they raised $529. $529 for federal campaigns. Now let me ask you something. I usually just say it, who's going to get their phone call returned? But let's go deeper than that. If there is money needed for housing, or there's money needed for economic development, or there's money needed to do assistance to put, those homes in Maryvale, John F. Long built them with swimming pools, many of them. It was a working class, starter community, and a great place to live. If there's money needed to put fences around those swimming pools because there are more babies that die in Maryvale than anywhere else in this state, why isn't it that happens? If there's money needed for job training, why isn't it that happens? Why is it that the national debate based on these federal contributions is based on how can I lower your taxes, and how can I cut out your inheritance tax, and how can I make sure that nobody in the pharmaceutical industry gets hurt if we start doing prescription drugs under Medicare? Who's being represented is the question. And so I will say to a Kiwanis group that clean money is civically important because it increases competition and it increases the voices, and it increases the number of people who are voting. In Arizona, from 1998, before clean elections went into effect, till 2002, which is the first gubernatorial election after clean elections went into effect, voter turnout went up 27% in the primaries. Other states' voter turnout's going down. Ours goes up over 25%. It went up 23% in the general election. So I would talk about the civic reasons to a Kiwanis group. But I think it's important for some people who really care about the strategic implications to understand that, as the Fannie Lou Hamer Project has said, that campaign finance is no longer just an issue, but it should be considered an issue as important as voting rights. That the right to access to funding a campaign should be as important as the right of access to going into the ballot box. Because now, because we've become more democratic as a nation, money counts, and counts big time. I'm told by people, I've talked to a number of U.S. senators, and they tell me that if you want to run for office, you need to understand two things. And if you're getting ready to hire a campaign, let's say you're just starting to run for office, that if you're going to run for the Congress or the Senate, that your campaign consultant, they come to interview you, not the other way around, because these are hired guns with a record, and they want to figure out whether they're going to take this candidate and get him into Washington or not. What do you think the first question they ask is?
How much money do you have?
No, not how much money do you have. I mean, that could be a good question, but it's not really usually. They don't ask you whether you're pro-choice, pro-life, pro-gun, pro-Bradyville. They ask, can you spend 7 hours a day on the phone asking for money? And then go out and meet with some voters. Then do a few speeches. But the speeches and the voters come second. Unless you're willing to spend 7 hours a day. And that's what Governor Napolitano talked about. When she ran for Attorney General, there was no clean elections law. And she had to spend her time dialing for dollars and selling tickets. If you get elected to the U.S. Senate, you have to understand that your job, yeah, you do some committees, yeah, you make some votes, yeah, you make some speeches, but your job, if you want to have power and be effective, your job is to raise $10,000 every day. From the time you're elected till 6 years later when you want to run for re-election. That if you can raise $2 to $3 million a year for the 6 years that you're in office, which works out to $10,000 every day, then you're ready to be in the Senate. Okay? Is it starting to, am I making a connection here between money and civil rights? To me, that has been what is profound about Arizona's clean election law. Governor Napolitano made a speech in May, and she said, you know, if I have to ask people for $300 or $500, I'm going to call those big zip codes. But she said, if I only need $5, I can go anywhere. And she said, I think I am the first candidate for governor that ever did fundraisers in South Phoenix. Well, I decided I'm going to check that out. Because it sounded pretty interesting, but I want to know if it was really true. What we did is there's another very good resource that called Follow the Money that we were able to get every gubernatorial campaign contribution for the 1998 election and the 2000 election and sort them by zip code. Now, in 1998, it really didn't make any difference whether you were a Democrat or a Republican, whether you were Paul Johnson or Governor Hall. Your money came from the places we talked about: Paradise Valley, Scottsdale, the Biltmore, the Tucson foothills, and out of state. Washington, D.C., New York City primarily. For Mr. Johnson, I think he had some relatives, Allentown, Pennsylvania. Okay. In 2002, you know where the top 10 zip codes worked out? For Governor Napolitano, 4 out of the 5 top 10 zip codes were in Tucson. Only one of them was the foothills. For Alfredo Gutierrez, Douglas, San Luis, Yuma, Tucson, Phoenix. Carol Springer, Sun City West, and that powerhouse Prescott Valley and Chino Valley both were in the top 10. Prescott, it was amazing. Betsy Bayless, Tempe never shows up. What happened was that people who were never, ever players in the political process became that. That zip codes that had never been heard from in terms of, political reverberation were heard from. And it changed the map of the state. All right, let me just stop here. I know you had a question, but other questions or thoughts here? Yes, sir.
Well, yeah, on the issue you were talking about, the areas, you said the money was, I forget now what the term you said.
Difference between money and organized money?
Organized money.
Yeah.
Does that mean, does organized money mean for what? Where's it go?
Well, I always make the distinction, and because I've taught a lot about organizing and power. Okay, when the Sun Devils have a football game, not the Cardinals for sure, but they're often 70,000 people there, right? But that's not organized people. Those are just a lot of people. But if you had 70,000 people walking neighborhoods, signing up people for vote by mail or get out the vote or voter registration, that's power. And the same thing with money. If I spend my money on consumer goods, on a big house, on cars, or things like that, my money's not organized. I've got the money, but it's not organized. But when I spend it on politicians, it's organized. I'm sorry. I'm not getting to your point.
Does the money go to like lobbyists as opposed to politicians, or to
it goes all both ways. It goes to when I want to organize my money under standard campaign practices, I make sure that I give. I make sure that every PAC that I'm associated with gives. I make sure that all of my employees give. In fact, I might give a big bonus to folks. And then a couple of months later, everybody gives to the campaign. I make sure that my friends know about it. I'm willing to host a party. And then I don't just give to lobbyists. Yes, I'll fund I'll make sure that I pay to the Real Estate Institute or whatever trade association I'm part of, and I hire lawyers. And but I also, I will help fund the Goldwater Institute, or I'll help fund, the Heritage Foundation. And I'll help fund, accuracy in media. I can organize my money to affect the media. I can organize my money to affect intellectuals. I can organize my money to affect universities. Make sure that I endow something that's going to be the enterprise chair. There are all kinds of ways I can organize my money to affect public policy. But when it comes to campaign finance, I can be very, very effective. And the fun thing about this is I don't have to live there. People who run for office, take state offices, people who run for office in Arizona under the traditional system, they can be running from Morenci, they can be running from Yuma, they can be running from Window Rock, and the money still comes from the Tucson foothills, Paradise Valley, and Scottsdale, and the Biltmore. Okay? North Washington, D.C., and New York. That's right. I don't have to have friends with money to run. In fact, you know, the first time I really ran into this was I was the director of the union in Austin, Texas. And you know, again, this really ties to civil rights. Austin, and I don't know what's happened. I've lived here 20 years now. But for all the time I was there, and I lived there 15 years, Austin did not have single-member districts for its city council. But there was a gentleman's agreement, and it turns out it was gentlemen. It was basically white guys with money. That there would always be one Latino and one black on the city council. And those folks always came from the community. But they also got their funding from the developers. And so, you know, there were certain things that they do for the community, but there were always things that happened for the developers. And so the community never got to really represent itself, because the money came from West Austin, and it came from out of town. It came, you know, and so you see what I'm saying? And the same thing happens under traditional campaign finance here, that the money comes from outside your district. And so the article in Black Enterprise magazine talks about that even in affluent black congressional districts, that often it's white money that really chooses who runs and who wins. Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment and then I've got a question.
Sure.
One of the things I've noticed in the political process is that politicians have done a real good job on selling poor people on rich people's issues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, you know. So anyway, this is my question. You said that you go to like Kiwanis clubs and so forth. Why would rich people want to change things? They've got it pretty good. I don't understand why they want to change things.
Well, a lot of them don't. And in fact, I'm going to talk about how there's now a power play going on to wreck the campaign finance in Arizona. But there's some that do. As an example, and people, you know, again, one of the rules of organizing is that sometimes people do what I would consider the right thing for what I consider to be the wrong reason. Okay? John McCain, as an example, who is very conservative and who is wealthy himself and certainly understands well. John McCain is sick and tired of every voter looking at him and saying he's a crook, because everybody thinks that the campaign finance system is so crooked that voters in America have become so cynical that it's threatening the government. Right? So people, it's not just, I mean, this affects everybody is what I'm getting at. Does that make sense to you? You know, he talks about that the system, you know, many people talk about, particularly if you're in a low income community and you see things that should be happening not happening, you talk about that the campaign finance system is corrupted. On the other hand, if you're someone who is connected to wealth and you're trying to do the right thing, they talk about that the system is corrosive. Because no matter how you deal with it, even if you try and do the right thing, people think you're a crook. And so there are a lot of very good people of conscience who are willing to see the system change. But now, frankly, you know, the biggest opponents of campaign finance reform are not corporations, they're not rich people, they're not insurance companies, those are all number two. The biggest opponents typically are incumbents. And so there are a lot, hang on just a second, I want to make this point. In Arizona, there are a lot of Republicans that are opposed clean elections, and a lot of them that are for it. Generally, Democrats are for it. In Massachusetts, it was the Democrats and the Democratic machine that opposed clean elections because they were scared to death that the bosses weren't going to have control anymore. Okay? And so one thing about clean elections is that the reason that it's so important in the states is because you can pass by initiative, as we did in 1998, a clean elections law. You can't do that in Congress. And Congress is full of incumbents. So the only way you can get federal congressional campaign finance reform that's real reform is to have it happen in a lot of states, and then those folks come up both the citizens and the politicians who come up through the system who are willing to do it. And so that goes to your question: why would people be willing to change the system? Incumbents usually are not. And so to get real reform in Washington, it has to succeed and it has to stay on the books in Arizona. Okay? Question here, and here then.
That was exactly my point. The two systems that we've got, state versus federal, there's the opportunity for us to have initiative and referendum, whereas on the federal level there isn't. And those in charge of financing their campaigns, the incumbents, of course, who are elected virtually 100% of the time without opposition, are in charge of those rules. They are not going to change those rules. It seems to me that one question that we've had here in Arizona, I don't know if this has been litigated or not, is whether we can reform the state system so that it affects federal elections. I think that particular question may become of prime importance, not perhaps in this election, but in future elections. For example, can we somehow have a say into how congressional candidates raise money for their election bids at the state level? Now, I'm assuming that, of course, the feds are probably going to say, well, that's a federal question and it cannot be done. I don't know if I agree with that or not, because we have all kinds of rules that have candidates qualify, getting a number of signatures, for example, on a petition in a particular district. Why couldn't we also have input into the way that monies are raised in those particular districts, in addition to qualification for office, for example?
Well, I'm not an attorney. I count that as one of my blessings. But I understand that just as Arizona voters passed term limits for congressional races as well as state races, congressional races were immediately struck down by the court. Only state races can be controlled. And because federal law controls federal finance, my guess is that it could not be done at a state level. So what has to be done is organize at a state level. Get it at a state level. Keep it at a state level. Show that it works at a state level. Get people like Raul Grijalva from Tucson, who came up through clean elections in Tucson, understands, the city of Tucson has clean elections as well, understands clean elections and goes to Washington and co-sponsors a real, honest-to-God clean elections bill in Congress. I mean, it is, unfortunately, it's a step-by-step process. But it's got to happen. It's got to happen here and be protected here if anything's going to happen at the federal level.
Did the bill make it out of the committee?
No. As I say, this is a toehold. Arizona and Maine are the two, as Bill Moyer said earlier, are the two states that have clean elections wall to wall. Every state office, whether it's the statewide office holders, the ones who run all across the state, or the senators and the representatives, are all eligible, if they choose, to run for clean elections, to run using the clean system. It has to be voluntary to be constitutional. Same thing in Maine. Vermont has it for governor, lieutenant governor. New Mexico just passed it for its version of the Corporation Commission, because they said the same thing that Terry Goddard said. Why in the world would you try and elect somebody to office, and the only people that are going to give to them are the people you're either going to sue or regulate? So New Mexico has adopted it. The same thing happened in North Carolina with their judges. And now there are 30 other states that are in the process of adopting clean elections one way or another. Connecticut's looking at it because their governor's about to go to jail. New Jersey's looking at it. Hawaii's looking at it. And West Virginia's looking at it. So there's really some good stuff going on. But I'm going to answer these two more questions, then I'm going to talk about bad stuff going on. Okay, you had a question, and then one over here. Yes, shout out.
Are you aware of any statistical studies that have correlated the size of campaign funds with success at the ballot box?
Is that really? If I answer your question, I'll just say yes, I'm aware.
Well, what did they show?
In 1998, you could go to the Secretary of State's office, pull campaign finance forms, and over 70% of the time predict the outcome of the election without ever looking at the voting results. In 2002, 2% of the time. 2% of the time. Because what happens is that even that they're with clean elections, if someone's willing to run clean, they're able to run a credible campaign. And so they may or may not win. But you don't have somebody who's got $200 running against somebody who's got $200,000. The candidates have enough money to run a credible campaign. Now, there are all kinds of strategic implications of that. I want to see the day when, as an example, you can be Latino and you can run in Glendale and win. Or you can be black and you can run in a district outside of South Phoenix and win. You can be Native American and you don't have to be on the reservation to win. Because there are many, many people who are in the community doing stuff, part of civic groups, outstanding leaders. And people know them and they like them and they've got the issues and they've got the networks, but they don't have the money. And so, there's this old country western song, if you got the money, I got the time. Well, in Arizona, if you got the time, the money's there, You got to have the time, you got to have the networks, and you got to have the issues. But we don't have to have our candidates being from a particular ethnic ghetto. We also don't have to have a situation where education is only really talked about in a few districts where maybe there's a Democratic primary. Why can't there be a candidate, whether it's a teacher, an administrator, a parent, a small business person that cares about education, why can't there be an education candidate running in all 30 legislative districts and qualify so that even if they lose, they've had enough money to push the issue out there and make people respond so that there's a real, honest-to-God dialogue about education all across the state. See, I can't say this at a Kiwanis Club. I just have to talk about civic stuff. But the strategic implications of clean money are incredible because what you're talking about is not only how many people, the disparities have gone away, but people can run a credible campaign even if they lose. And so it starts, issues get talked about. Okay? How are we doing on time? I don't have my watch.
We have plenty of time.
Okay. Yes, we're here and here. Yes.
Yeah, not to be the bad guy in all this.
Oh, what you're looking forward to. Go ahead. I'm glad you self-declared.
Yeah, I was an engineer for 25 years. If it's not broke, don't fix it. I'm not sure what are the implications of having all these poor and all these people getting involved. And I know this sounds horrible, but the system has worked for a long time very successfully. We're the most prosperous country in the world. Mm-hmm. And I'm just asking that as a question. I'm not saying one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Had one for me.
Having worked in politics, I can tell you that I've worked with some real rich folks, well-educated folks, that were dumb as a stone. Jimmy Carter. Everybody thinks he's the world's best person, but he was a lousy president in many, many ways. I mean, I know this is not a place where people study a lot of theology, but Reinhold Niebuhr wrote a book called Moral Men, Moral Society. And he talked about that sometimes people who are really good as individual human beings are rotten as being leaders of groups. And sometimes people who are rotten, whether it's a Franklin Roosevelt or a Bill Clinton, in their personal life actually have some leadership and can do a great deal of good. And I happen to think that intelligence, goodwill, people smarts, all of those things rise to the top, and that the competitive system of running for office, not guaranteeing somebody will win, but running for office will make us a better state and a better country. And from what I've seen so far, it's happening. Lady here.
Michael Grant, who is the host of Horizon, he spoke at Friendship Village about a month or so ago, and a question was asked to him about clean elections. He spent quite a while giving this example of how unfair it had been in the race with Matt Salmon with
Mhm.
Governor Napolitano.
Mhm.
Will that be used in this coming campaign against the clean elections? And what are some of the other things that will be used against it, and how can you answer them?
Sure. Let me back up and talk about that there is a campaign, and then I'll talk about just those kinds of things. I think I mentioned it earlier. The law has been challenged by a bunch of folks over a long time. There have been 8 different lawsuits. Some of them have gone all the way to the Supreme Court. None of them have won, trying to kill the law. There have been attempts in the legislature to kill or maim the law. None of them have been successful. And so now there is a committee that's formed. It is funded mostly by developers, also by some insurance companies, and by lobbyists. And they are very, very smart. There's nothing in their campaign that says, we don't like clean elections. The name of the committee is No Taxpayer Money for Politicians. Everybody loves that. I've seen focus groups, sat in on, in behind the mirror in focus groups and watched people react to it. 14 out of 14 say, "Oh yeah, where do I sign?" And then you hear, the focus groups. They don't try and just persuade people. They try and find out what works on both sides in terms of arguments. And so they'll say, "Well, let me tell you why you should vote for this. It was unfair to Matt Salmon, and I'll explain that in a minute. And there was this woman, going back to your point about fringe candidates, there was this woman in Tucson that went up and had a poster made. She was standing in her bikini saying, 'Vote for me.' And there were these guys in Tempe, the libertarians that ran for office, and they had this great idea that we'll go register voters in bars. And we went to Scottsdale to register voters, and we live in Tempe, but we're gonna, And so there are all these horror stories. So they told them those things. And then they said, the campaign, some of the campaigns are still dirty. There were all these mudslinging going back and forth. So there's no such thing as a clean election. And then on the other side, they say, this is about clean elections. And here's why, here's what's going on, and here's what's happening, that $5 now replaces it, and the special interests no longer have to be in control, and those sorts of things. And it's amazing. When people find out it's about clean elections, the texture of the focus group completely, even after they know all the arguments of the opposition, the texture changes. In one focus group, the entire group changes its vote, and the other one, about half the votes change the vote. So they're very, very smart. It's all about no tax money for politicians, because that sounds so good. And in fact, one of the things I passed around today is that there are a lot of people who love clean elections that have also signed this petition to kill it. And so I've given you, if you have, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but if you have somebody, or somebody dear to you, or somebody even not so dear to you, has signed one of these petitions and didn't know what they're signing, then there's an affidavit here that goes to the Secretary of State to take your name off. Because a lot of people have found out what's going on and are really, really upset. Now, Governor Salmon. Almost Governor Salmon. Here's how clean elections works. It's a little complicated, but if I'm running for office, Mr. Butler's going to run for office over here, okay? And your name is, what's your name? Beverly, you're going to run against Mr. Butler. And Mr. Butler's running a traditional campaign, you're running a clean campaign. Let's say you're running for the legislature. When you get your 250 people, it's about 210, but by the time you get a cushion, 250 people give you $5, and so you now are qualified, and you automatically get a $12,000 check to run a primary campaign. Now, Mr. Butler, you guys probably didn't know this about him. I know him from church. I know him when he went to Unitarian Church. You may not know it to look at him, but he's actually a cousin of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Look at him again, you'll see the family resemblance right there. So he's got money in his background, and he's able to loan himself some money. So Bob has got $20,000 now. Okay, you only got 12. Well, you get a check then, what's called a matching grant, for another $8,000. Because if Bob goes out and raises money traditionally, we want you to be able to run a credible campaign, and so you get matching funds. Okay? Now here's what Bob's going to do, and what Tom Horn did running for superintendent of education, but Matt Salmon didn't. Bob goes back to Arnold and says, you know, she's already got $20,000. I got $20,000. Give me another 30. No, give me 40. So how much they give you now, Bob? 60,000, right? You got 60,000. How much has Beverly got? 20. How much will she end up with now that Bob's got 60,000? No, she gets not 60, not 30. She gets 36. Because the maximum she can get in total, whether it's Bob getting his money from Arnold or whether it's somebody helping Bob, you know, the committee in support of three-letter candidates runs a campaign, and the committee in support of the committee in opposition of polysyllabic names runs a hit piece on Beverly, and they run a pro piece on Bob. You know, no matter how it adds up, Beverly can only get 3 times the allotment. So that works out to $36,000, okay? So what happened in the campaign was that Mr. Salmon, and I know this because the chair of the Clean Elections Institute is a guy who worked for Senator McCain, he worked for Governor Symington, he ran Betsy Bayless's campaign, so he really understands particularly the Republican side of politics. Mr. Salmon thought he could raise $2.5 million. He knew that the most that Governor Napolitano could get with all the matching funds was a little less than $2 million. He thought he could raise $2.5 million. And if he did that, he would blow her out of the water. And by the way, he blew Betsy Bayless out of the water the same way in the primary. So I mean, so he knew that the law could help him as long as he got above that 3 times amount. Okay. Now, Mr. Golan actually went to him and said, Mr. Salmon, I ran Fife Simon's campaign when he was governor, when he was running for re-election. So everybody knew us, and all of the PACs were willing to give to us, and we only raised we didn't raise quite $2.5 million then. You're not an incumbent. You're only from a congressional district in Mesa. You don't have a statewide base. Are you sure you can raise $2.5 million? Because if you don't, you're going to get stuck. Oh yeah, we're going to get our $2.5 million. Well, he didn't. And so that's why people think it's so, why he thinks it's so unfair. Because he expected to blow Mr. Napolitano out of the water, blow past, to do the Arnold trick, to go way past the 3 times amount, and she would be stuck. And in fact, she ran out of money. She could get no more matching money 10 days before the election. And the Republican Party could continue to run, independent ads for Mr. Salmon, and she didn't get any matching money because she was matched out. But it just didn't go, the money that they thought, that they budgeted and thought would materialize didn't materialize. So that's kind of, that's complicated, but do you understand what I'm saying?
How much was it?
They ended up being about the same when you counted all of the independent funds that came in for Mr. Salmon as well as the match money for Mr. Napolitano, and it ended up being about even. Now, let me just add one little filter to this, if I can. Some people say that because it's only 13,000 votes, some people say that the real difference was that Thursday before the election, Mr. Napolitano was out doing rallies with voters, and Mr. Salmon was in Houston raising money. So there is really an advantage to being able to be with the voters. Okay.
I have a question, and this is more on the national level, but I heard that Al Gore has $5 million left from his failed campaign, so-called failed campaign, that he wants to give to John Kerry. My question is, if all these people are running for office and they get all these matching and qualifying money, and they don't spend it, do they get to keep it?
No. No. You are not. This is really interesting because there's a couple of important parts of this answer. You cannot end your campaign with a surplus. You have to pay any surplus money back. If you buy some really heavy duty, if you end your campaign for the legislature and you still have $1,000 back in the bank, you write that check back to the state trust fund for clean elections. Okay. So by the same token, you can't end up in debt. All your bills have to be paid. So printers love this law because they're always getting stiffed by campaigns. A little story that not many, I found out not many people know, and this just comes from being a lobbyist back in the day. if you run for office, and you're doing it traditionally, and particularly if you're running for Congress, but also if you're running for the legislature and you're doing it traditionally, it's important to end up in debt, particularly if you're going to win. In fact, your campaign consultant will tell you to end up in debt. Now, you can't do this under clean elections, but it's important to end up in debt. Because, why? There are two reasons. If Bob runs, he's running traditionally now, Arnold's giving him his money, and he wins, what happens to all those lobbyists that were rooting for Beverly? Or they were rooting for another one of Bob's opponents that was running traditionally and they gave him money? They need to give what, the lobbyists actually, there's black humor in the legislature. The lobbyists actually have a name for this. They need to give Bob a get well card. Because they backed the wrong horse and they need to get well. The lobbyists need to get well. And so it's important to have a debt so we can help Bob out now because we were in the wrong camp. The other thing we can do is that we will do that the lobbyists for the phone company will sponsor a reception for Bob at $250 a person, and 50 lobbyists will come and help him retire his debt. Now, 2 weeks later, the phone company for the Petroleum Institute will host a fundraiser for another candidate that has a debt, and the same 50 lobbyists will come and pay their $250 checks there. And then a week later, and it's just a round table. And these lobbyists all pay their $250 and go to each debt retirement party hosted by one or another group of folks. Pretty slick, huh? In the political world, if you can win, that's a good thing. But that doesn't happen under clean elections. Yes, sir?
An article recently in the paper emphasized what you're talking about. It describes Congress as a wholly owned subsidiary of the pharmaceutical business who have more lobbyists in Washington than there are congressmen.
Oh, sure.
That's probably not correct. They're probably fully leased. Because they're replaceable. Congress, that is. Yeah. If they don't vote right, they're replaceable. So they're leased, they're not owned. Yes?
I know absolutely nothing about what you're talking about.
I'm not sure I do either.
And secondly, I was reading in the business sections every day something about a debt, a budget of $2.4 trillion. Now, if it's 1 trillion, it's 10 to the third, thousands, millions, billions, trillions, 10 to the third, 10 to the sixth, 10 to the ninth, 10 to the 12th. That's a 1 with 12 zeros after. Who the hell determines the value of a dollar? I ask many people, and they always say, oh, supply and demand. Is that really something that works or what?
Yeah, it's anymore it's based on what you believe it's worth. And what other countries believe it's worth. I'm way above my pay grade here trying to talk economics, but it's based on what you think it's worth and what other countries think it's worth. It's not pinned to any tangible thing anymore. Let me just I want to ask you to think about something. The lobbyists, insurance companies, developers have already raised $300,000. They have put an army of people out on the street getting these petitions signed for no taxpayer money for politicians. They're going to get it on the ballot. It's going to be on the ballot in November. If it wins, what's happened in Arizona, that over a third of the legislature now, over half the candidates have run clean, and over a third of the legislature has been elected clean. In Maine, when it got to 70%, they passed universal health care. Maine has one of the most progressive health care bills in the country. There's hope. There's honest to God hope that people rather than money will speak. And that's what I mean about civil rights. That people from every neighborhood, from every walk of life, will speak and have their voices heard. Because $5 is universal currency, just like a vote. And it will make a difference. We got to beat, in my mind, I'm out to beat these folks. I'm out to get it voted down. Because they're going to have it on the ballot in November. if, I passed out a card, if this is something that you feel that you have an affinity for, I'd ask you to consider 3 things. Number 1, sign the card. Endorse. Helping keep these rascals from getting their way. Number 2, I mean, I could ask you for money, and I just did. You know, it's out there. You can do that. But we're doing something that is much more important. We're asking people, regular folks, to do what we call house parties, where you gather about 30 people together, 20 or 30 people together, and we'll have a speaker come and explain what's going on. And it won't be like today. It'll be like 20 minutes. But we've got to create this grassroots buzz across the state that clean elections is working. It's not perfect, but it's working. And that it's in trouble. And that this really sneaky way of putting it on the ballot is going to win unless we get the word out. And so on that card, there's a place to say, I'll host an info session. If you think you could do that, please do so. Obviously, we'd love you to volunteer. We'd love you to give. But if you can help us, you know, we actually have professional organizers that will come and help you organize the thing, put together an invitation and a list, you know, help you figure out a list and all that kind of stuff. Really help you out. So it's real easy. You know, it's one of the things, if you build it, they will come. You know, we'll have people work with you. So that, but it really, honest to gosh, is creating a buzz across the state. And the neat thing is that if you have 25 people come to your home, 2 or 3 of those people will agree to do another house party. And what will happen is that most of the people that come to your home are going to be pretty much like you. But the next go around, there's going to be somebody from the bowling league, or there's going to be somebody from the soccer, you know, coalition, or whatever. And so we're going to break into lots and lots of new social networks and really do that buzz. So, if I were to summarize, Arizona is, for once in the 20 years that I've been here, we're at the top of a good list. And that it, and I think I can say this here more than anywhere else, that not only is it important from, you know, they call it goo-goos, good government. Not only is it important from a good government point of view, but if you take a step back and see where we can go with this, it's going to be important for education, it's important for civil rights, it's important for all the things that people care about. And because of that, it's in trouble. But the people who have, you know, the people who have enjoyed having the run of the mill for a long time want to kill clean elections. And so, and it's going to happen one way or the other in November. And so, you know, if in your conscience that's something you can help with, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you much.
If you appreciate the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix and would like to see more, then subscribe to our channel and check us out on Patreon. Links are in the description.